Hello, everybody. My name's John Cockburn-Evans, and welcome to our second podcast from Engaged Intelligence on the importance and the factors that affect trust in organizations. I am here again today with my co-founder, Ben Chalmers, and we're going to do a short podcast today on following on from the previous discussion and the overarching theme of trust on what it really means in organizations today. I'll be asking Ben a few questions and we'll be responding with each other, and then we'll close out at the end. So, good morning, Ben. Welcome. Good to see you again. So, I guess really just to start off, how do you think we can face off trust problems in organizations, right? What do you think some of the strategies, we can have without going through the software, more generally in terms of dealing with this huge problem we've got with trust at the moment?
So I think when you have caused a trust issue, the most important thing you need to do is to take responsibility for it as quickly as you can. So the most important thing when it comes to maintaining trust is to recognize when you've done something that has caused people to lose trust, to take responsibility and to put things back. If you've already lost trust, on the other hand, I think what you need to do then is be substantially more transparent, because transparency is a way people can actually see what it is you're doing to remedy situations and why you're doing the things that you're doing.
Yeah, it's interesting, very powerful points there. I think certainly the transparency point is extremely well made and it's a critical element of trust. But I think I'd like to go back to your first point and go a bit deeper, if that's all right, Ben. This issue of recognizing when you've caused a problem. I mean, quite often I think as human beings, we can probably feel when trust is broken, right? Subliminally and emotionally, that happens. But there's another element to the point you made earlier about which, the point you're saying when you recognize that you've broken trust, you do something about it. But how do you recognize that it's you? Not trying to attribute blame, but surely, that recognition takes a bit of effort, certainly quite a bit of self-awareness. That seems as though that could be a bit of a challenge, Ben.
Well, it could be a huge challenge. In fact, face to face, you might notice it, you might see it in somebody's eyes, but so much of what we're doing these days is remote, disconnected from other people, that we have no idea at all how what we're doing is impacting other people. So all we have are secondary ways of spotting whether we've lost trust. And what we can do there is we can see that people's behavior towards us has in some way changed. That's
Yes,
all we
that's
that's all
true.
we get.
Yeah, and that will, of course, depend very much on the individual. A lot has been talked in the recent 5 to 10 years about emotional intelligence. We've got a lot of bright people working in organizations with high IQs, some with very high EQs in EI. But that will be very individual, won't it? We're talking about building trust as a team and as a collective, but it will be down to the individual to recognize that is going on and linked to emotional intelligence. So to me, that just says there's a level of complexity involved in this, which is quite challenging. It doesn't necessarily mean that we can fix everything, and certainly there won't be a one size fits all, or to quote the thing, no magic wand or a silver bullet. So it's a very heavily contextual challenge, heavily nuanced, which requires a lot of perspective. So that in itself is quite interesting. So again, just following on from that, Ben, I'd be interested to know again what your views are in what do you see? Because you've been in very large organizations yourself and more recently. What do you see as the biggest challenges now that are facing employees in the context of trust?
So we've been through a really rough few years. We've had COVID, we had where everybody left the office environment and started working remotely. We've then had varying forms of return to the office. We've had various forms of monitoring people while they're working remotely. And then we've had the economic downturn where we have had huge causes of redundancy where people have lost their jobs without there necessarily being any reason, and their implied social contract with the company has been violated. And all of these things have left people feeling incredibly unstable. I think trust at work in particular has plummeted, and really it's not due to any one thing, it's due to how people respond. If I may, I'll go right back to the beginning of COVID, because at the beginning of COVID, lots of companies handled it really well. People were told to go and work from home, and then companies started doing things to help people work from home, to help make that change happen. And in fact, right at the beginning of COVID, there was a huge increase in trust that I observed within organizations. Because what happened was, within the organization, there was an immediate response to this difficult situation, and everyone could see it was a difficult situation.
Yeah, that's really interesting what you talk about at the start. I mean, I saw the same thing. Probably maybe not as marked as you or others, only because I traveled a lot in my previous work and I was used to working from home online in hotels and in airports. But you're right, definitely the initial trust element did go up significantly, possibly because people had to find faith in a new system, right? And there was no other option in order to work effectively and connect with people. So that in itself was, very evident, I would say. What I'd like to come back on, because you make a good point, is you mentioned about unstable was one of the words you used in the previous conversation. I'd like to come back to that in terms of instability, because, and it was one of the themes to today's call. Actually, I've just been reading, or started to read Daniel Kahneman's last book, called Noise. Everybody will know him for the book Thinking Fast and Slow, where he talked a lot about cognitive bias and the impact on organizations' economy. Now he's talking about noise. And what he's saying is there's a lot of noise in the conversations that we're having and the work we do and the analysis and everything that gets underestimated. So that in itself is causing a lot of problems in terms of accuracy, which I thought was quite interesting. And he's gone through some mathematical formulae there, and it basically says that the noise itself, i.e. the instability, you could say, is noise, volatility, is just as significant as bias, right? Or groupthink or any other problems, when you're trying to get a level of accuracy and precision. And if you think about in the relationship of trust, to a certain extent, accuracy is a factor in trust, isn't it? In order, in any dialogue, in any relationship, you need a level of not necessarily precision, but accuracy, i.e. people need to have faith in what people are saying is correct. Another way of saying accurate, right? So I think I'd be interested to get your, I've been going on a bit now, your reflections on instability, stability, and how that sort of relates to trust, specifically,
So in the last podcast, I described trust as being the ability to predict. And when you have a very volatile situation, your ability to predict what's going to happen next is really difficult. So one of the key ways of maintaining trust is to try to handle that volatility as much as you can. And there are a couple of ways of doing that. Again, transparency is very important. It at least allows people to see the way things are moving. The other is to be consistent in those areas where you can be consistent, and to be very clear about those things. Also, we talk a lot about authenticity in the work we do. And again, authenticity is something that doesn't change. If you are authentic, people can predict how you're going to behave very effectively. And again, that enables you to provide a level of consistency even while the world is bouncing around up and down. You can still rely on how people behave in respect to that. And that, I think, is almost more important than the external factors, because trust, again, is a relationship thing. Trust is something you do as an interpersonal activity. It isn't something that you do with the world as a whole.
No, that's really interesting. And again, you brought back to trust to the three key elements of authenticity, consistency, and transparency. What I particularly liked was your point about predictability and the fact that, to a certain extent, authentic is interesting. Of the three of those attributes, it's the one that's probably the most binary. It's probably the one that is you either are authentic or you're not. There's no real middle ground with that one. Not saying that that's not the case with the others, but I think the predictability link is really important, because one of the things that people are saying is, struggling with at the moment, generally, not just in trust, but there's probably certainly a soft link, is the rate of change in the world. People say, change is inevitable. People have been saying that. We've been living in this VUCA world for 15, 20 years, the volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, etc. But I remember speaking to one of my clients just earlier on this year, and they were saying it's not the change is not the problem, it's the pace of change. And, that links directly to predictability. So I think some really powerful points there that I think it would be good for our sort of listeners to reflect on. And again, this is one of the areas why we're trying to come up, hopefully, with a system, I'll call it, that will help redress the balance. So, before we close today, Ben, I'll just ask again a critical question is, right now, how do you think, we've touched a bit on it already. How do you think individuals can measure trust? How do you believe they can do that?
So this very much depends on the individual and their situation. I'm going to say the majority of people are employees within a company that are looking to measure their trust within that environment. And I think people primarily measure it by how much oversight they feel is put onto them, in that they feel trusted if they are not micromanaged, if they are not monitored, if they are given greater levels of autonomy. And I think it's that particular level of monitoring that is the lack of, that provides a major lack of trust, shows a major lack of trust in them.
Yeah, it was interesting because there've been a few high-profile cases in the media that have caused all sorts of problems around keystroke monitoring, for instance, particularly with remote work. I mean, that's just one element of it, but I think the point you make around autonomy is really powerful. That's the difference between maybe robots and human beings. Human beings like to feel as though they're in control. They fight to feel as though they're not being overly monitored, rather. They like to know that where the boundaries are, and to a certain extent set their own boundaries. We can't always do that all the time. So that's really useful, Ben, and it's a great lead-in to our next podcast, which will be about how individuals deal with autonomy in the context of trust. So that will be podcast number 3. So I'd love to thank you again, Ben, today for your time and your interactions. And I would urge people to go and have a listen to this podcast again. We'll be sharing it on the channel, and look out for more. I think after the third one, we're going to be looking for some guest speakers. We've got 1 or 2 lined up. So please like, share, and comment. And we look forward to speaking to you again. Thank you again, Ben.
Thank you very much, John.